Billionaire father Grant Ellison visited his daughter at the school lunchroom and saw what the teacher did. Outraged, he froze mid-step, heart pounding as if the entire world stopped around his little girl. But the moment his eyes locked onto the humiliation unfolding before him, something inside him quietly snapped. And what he did next made the whole staff tremble. He hadn't told the school he was coming today. Grant Ellison never announced his movements, especially not to people who only respected power when they could see it. He came quietly, dressed in a simple navy jacket and jeans instead of tailored suits. No security behind him, no cameras, no board members whispering strategies, no investors tugging at his time. Today he was just a father, not the man whose decisions shifted continents, whose net worth caused economists to write articles, whose private jet carried him across oceans as easily as most people cross the street. He only wanted to see Harper, his 7-year-old daughter, soft-spoken, bright-eyed, curly-haired, the only part of his world untouched by the cutthroat business battlefield. She had been quiet lately, too quiet. A kind of silence that didn't sound like peace, but resignation. He felt it every time she came home, clutching her backpack too tightly, avoiding questions about her day, swallowing thoughts like they were things she had no right to speak aloud. That silence is what brought him here. He walked through the corridor unnoticed, his hands buried in his pockets, eyes scanning handwritten posters taped to the walls. "Kindness is power," one read. Another, "Respect every child." The irony almost made him laugh, almost. He didn't know yet why Harper's spirit had dimmed, but he could feel that whatever it was, it lived inside these walls. Then he reached the lunchroom doors and stopped breathing. At the center of the cafeteria, with tables filled with chattering students and cafeteria ladies moving trays of food, stood Harper, small, shaky, her lunch tray trembling in her hands. Towering over her was Mrs. Talbot, her teacher, a woman in her early 40s with a posture sharpened by authority, her arms crossed, voice piercing through the room like a blade. "Look at this," Mrs. Talbot scolded loudly. "Harper Ellison thinks she's special because of her last name. She thinks she doesn't have to finish her assignments like the rest of us." Children stared. Some giggled. Harper's head hung low, her shoulders tight, fingers digging into the edge of her tray as though holding on for dear life. The food on her plate, nothing but a plain sandwich and a single bruised apple, told Grant everything he needed to know. Harper usually brought a neatly packed lunch, her favorite strawberries, her little dinosaur thermos. But today, no. Today she was eating whatever was given to children whose lunch accounts were flagged as unpaid. Unpaid, impossible, not with his money, not with his vigilance, unless someone intentionally made sure her account stayed empty. Grant moved closer, but slowly, like a lion calculating the moment to strike. He heard Mrs. Talbot's next words, like bullets tearing through his chest. "Maybe if you didn't think your father's money makes you better, you'd learn some respect. Say it, repeat after me. I am not entitled." Harper's lip trembled. She opened her mouth, voice barely a thread. I am not." The sentence didn't get to finish. Grant placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, not rough, but firm, grounding her like a shield she never knew she could lean on. Harper looked up, eyes shiny with tears she had refused to shed. Then she saw who stood behind her, and everything inside her broke. She crashed into his chest, clinging to his shirt, small sob muffled against him. Grant wrapped his arms around her, voice calm enough to frighten silence into the room. "She will not say that," he said. Mrs. Talbot's face paled. "Sir, you can't interfere." Grant raised his hand lightly, not to silence her, but to warn her. "Watch me." The cafeteria went still. Even the refrigerator humming in the corner felt muted under the weight of his presence. Grant didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply held Harper, letting her heartbeat slow against his. The billionaire father had come to visit his daughter, but what he found was injustice draped in authority, humiliation disguised as discipline. And in that moment there was no boardroom more dangerous than the cafeteria floor beneath his shoes. Harper whispered, "Daddy, she makes me stand during lunch. She says I shouldn't sit with the other kids because I'm different. Different, not privileged, punished for existing." Grant's jaw tightened. The room swayed with tension. A storm collected behind his eyes, quiet, cold, unhurried. "What happens," he asked, voice low, "when a school forgets compassion, when teachers forget they shape children, not break them, when power is used to wound instead of guide?" Mrs. Talbot tried to regain footing. "Mr. Ellison, Harper needs to learn humility." Grant smiled, slow, dangerous. "Then allow me to teach you the definition of humility, Mrs. Talbot." Every staff member within earshot felt the air change, like an invisible verdict approached, and no one knew who would survive it. Grant lifted Harper, her legs wrapping around his waist like she was clinging to the last safe place in the world. He brushed a tear from her cheek and turned, not leaving but advancing. And whatever was coming next would shake every adult in that building, because he had not come here as the billionaire the world feared. He had come as a father, and fathers don't retreat. Fathers fight. Grant didn't head toward the exit. He walked deeper into the lunchroom, past tables of frozen students, past shocked cafeteria workers, past teachers whose spines straightened with instinctive fear. He carried Harper like she was both a child and a declaration, her small fists still gripping his collar as if letting go meant returning to a world where adults could hurt her without consequence. Every step he took echoed louder than the last. The lunchroom doors swung open as Principal Eleanor Whitford hurried inside, summoned by whispers and frantic text messages. A stiff woman in a charcoal blazer, with sharp glasses and sharper judgment, she moved with practiced authority, but that authority wavered the instant she recognized the man standing before her. "Mr. Ellison," she clasped her hands together, forced smile too bright, too polished. "We weren't expecting you today." "No," Grant replied softly. "You weren't." Harper's tears dampened his shirt. Principal Whitford noticed the child's shaking form, the half-eaten sandwich still abandoned on her tray, and concern flickered, but only for a second before professionalism smoothed it away. "We can discuss whatever the matter is in my office." He cut her off with a single look, not rude, not loud, just final. "In private, issues are hidden," he said. "We will speak where she was humiliated." Teachers nearby exchanged glances. The room thickened with a silence that felt like glass, thin, fragile, easy to shatter. Mrs. Talbot stood rigid, regret beginning to creep into her features now that her actions were laid bare under the cold light of accountability. But pride was a stubborn disease. "Mr. Ellison," she began defensively, "Harper is disruptive. She refuses to follow instructions. She thinks because her father is a billionaire, she—" Grant gently placed Harper in a nearby seat and crouched so his eyes aligned with her small, frightened ones. "What happened before lunch?" he asked. Harper hesitated. She had learned fear of speaking, fear of truth, fear of consequences. She looked toward Mrs. Talbot, a flinch pulling through her shoulders, and Grant understood. He reached for her hand, warm and trembling. "You're safe now," he whispered. Harper exhaled shakily, words forming like fragile paper boats pushed onto water. "I answered a question wrong," she murmured. "I said the sun was a star, not a planet." And she laughed. Everyone laughed. Grant blinked slowly. That was all? A mistake any child could make? A moment meant for teaching, not ridicule? Harper continued. Then she took my lunch card because she said rich kids don't need help. She said she wanted to humble me. A hush swept the room. Kids stared at Mrs. Talbot with wide eyes, some confused, some uncomfortable, some quietly pleased to see the powerful teacher exposed at last. Principal Whitford's jaw tightened. She spoke carefully, like someone navigating a minefield. "Mrs. Talbot, is this accurate?" Mrs. Talbot's confidence faltered. "Students should all be treated equally. I was teaching her not to rely on privilege." Grant rose to his full height, calm, composed, but there was steel in his voice that could slice marble. "You don't teach humility by humiliation," he said. "You don't build character by breaking a child down. You don't demand respect by withholding kindness." He stepped closer, not threatening, but undeniable. A force of presence earned from boardrooms where billions hung on breath. "You teach humility by modeling it. You earn respect by giving it." Mrs. Talbot swallowed hard, but Grant wasn't finished. "I've spent 20 years hiring people who shape the future," he said. "And I've also fired people who forgot they're dealing with humans, not pawns." The principal shifted nervously. "Mr. Ellison, please. Let us handle disciplinary measures." Grant shook his head. "No handling, not quietly, not internally, not buried under paperwork where nothing changes and more children are hurt." The lunchroom grew tighter, smaller. Staff members leaned in. Students held their breath. Harper watched her father as if seeing him through new eyes, shoulders slowly untensing, fear melting at the edges. "You think money shields me from emotion?" Grant asked the room. "No, it amplifies it. Because I know how power works, how it corrupts, how it excuses cruelty behind rational words like policy and procedure." He turned slightly, voice resonating outward. "And today, you all saw a system fail a child." Mrs. Talbot opened her mouth to respond, but Grant wasn't addressing her anymore. His tone sharpened with purpose. "I am donating $5 million to this school district," he said. Gasps rippled through the cafeteria. "But," he added, the contrast cutting like a blade, "only under one condition." Every adult stiffened. "That condition is accountability." He pointed to the broken lunch card on the table, to Harper's red eyes, to the bruise on her spirit the room could feel. No more humiliation as discipline, no more teachers who break children to build their own ego, no more power imbalances masked as education. He turned to the principal directly. "If you accept my donation, then Mrs. Talbot will be removed from any role involving children until she is retrained, reevaluated, and proven capable of compassion, not control." Principal Whitford froze. The faculty stared. Mrs. Talbot's face drained of color. "You can choose the money," Grant said calmly, "or you can choose to protect cruelty, but you cannot choose both." Harper exhaled softly, like she had taken her first full breath in months. The principal opened her mouth, torn between politics, ethics, and fear. The school was seconds away from a seismic shift, and what happened next would change everything. Principal Whitford's hand trembled faintly as she adjusted her glasses, weighing $5 million against reputation, policy, and the fear flowing through her staff like electricity. The cafeteria held its breath, suspense coiling tightly around every silent witness. She inhaled, slow, calculated. "Mr. Ellison," she began, voice thin and cautious, "removing a teacher is a procedural matter. There are forms, union protocols." Grant's gaze didn't waver. "And my condition stands." Power didn't need volume. It needed certainty. He had plenty. The principal's lips pressed into a narrow line. She looked at Harper, the child still clutching her father's sleeve, wide-eyed and silent. Something human flickered through the principal's expression then. Regret, maybe recognition of the culture she oversaw, yet didn't see, or refused to see. "Mrs. Talbot," she said finally, formal and clipped, "until further notice, you are relieved of classroom duties." The room erupted, not loud, not chaotic, but a ripple of disbelief, astonishment, and something like justice long overdue. Students exchanged shocked glances. A group of cafeteria workers murmured under their breath. One teacher exhaled as though releasing years of held frustration. Mrs. Talbot stood motionless, face flushed, denial flickering behind her stiff posture. "This is absurd," she muttered. "All this over one child?" Grant's voice cut like frost. "Over one child too many." Mrs. Talbot flinched. For the first time, she looked less like authority and more like a woman confronted by the mirror she avoided for years. Children she'd belittled, dismissed, embarrassed, resurfaced like ghosts in her eyes. But pride dies slowly. "You don't understand what it's like to manage a room full of misbehaving kids," she snapped. Grant lifted Harper into his arms again, not for show, but because she reached for him, instinctively trusting the arms that shielded her. "I understand leadership," he replied. "I understand that when people follow out of fear, the structure is already broken." A hush spread again, deeper this time, like truth settling. "And I understand," he continued softly, "that Harper is quiet because someone taught her silence." The cafeteria lights hummed overhead. Grant gently brushed Harper's curls from her forehead, his voice quiet enough that she heard it more than anyone. "You never have to shrink for anyone again." Her breathing steadied. For the first time since he arrived, she lifted her eyes to the room, not hiding, but witnessing. Principal Whitford exhaled, shoulders lowering as though accepting a verdict she could no longer avoid. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "I'll schedule a district meeting to finalize procedures. Mrs. Talbot will be on temporary administrative leave, effective immediately." Mrs. Talbot's mouth opened to protest, but Grant's next words stopped her like a door slammed in a storm. "Harper will remain at this school," he said, "but she will never again be taught by someone who confuses control with care." He didn't need to say more. Mrs. Talbot turned, spine rigid, and marched out, each step like a retreat from a battle she had already lost. Silence remained, thick and full, waiting for the next move. Grant carried Harper toward the front of the room, turning so the entire cafeteria could see her face. Not scared now, but seen, heard, held. "I didn't donate $5 million for luxury facilities," he said. "I donated it so children leave this building better than they entered it, so no child eats alone, so mistakes become lessons, not punishments." One boy near the back stood slowly, eyes bright. "Harper sat with us before," he said, voice cracking with courage. "But then, Mrs. Talbot said she shouldn't." Another child nodded, then another, then 10. Kids who'd stayed silent under authority began speaking, not loud, not rebellious, but truthful. Stories spilled out of them like water breaking through a dam. "She took my pencil and called me slow. She made me eat last. She said my mom packs poor lunches so I should learn to be grateful." Each word was a wound, each voice confirmation. Grant closed his eyes briefly, not to hide emotion, but to anchor it. He had come as a father. Now he stood as a witness to a culture that had been quietly rotting beneath polished banners about kindness. Principal Whitford looked shaken, not because she was caught, but because she realized she hadn't been looking at all. Grant raised Harper slightly, like presenting truth itself. "You have brilliant children here," he said. "Curious children, sensitive children, children who deserve to grow without shame as currency." He set Harper down gently, and she reached for his hand, smaller but confident now, fingers weaving between his like trust rebuilt thread by thread. "And when adults forget," Grant continued. Someone must remind them. He turned toward the staff, toward the teachers, who were watching with trembling awareness. This is not the end. It's the beginning. A school isn't walls, it's heart. And today, the heart beats louder. The cafeteria felt alive again, pulse returning, breath deepening, children looking at each other instead of the floor. Harper squeezed his hand. "Daddy," she said softly, voice clear for the first time, "can I sit with my friends now?" Grant smiled, warm, full. "Yes," he answered, with pride. Harper walked toward the table of children who had spoken up. They made space for her instantly, not out of pity, but welcome. She sat, small shoulders no longer hunched, eyes bright with something new. Belonging. Grant watched her, silent, present, steady, but deep in his mind, gears were already turning. The donation was only the first step. Change this large would not go uncontested. Power never shifted quietly, and he knew someone would push back. There were staff who benefited from silence. There were politics he had just disrupted. There were consequences waiting in shadows. And tomorrow the real battle might begin. But today a father stood firm. Today a little girl found her voice. And tomorrow someone else would tremble. Grant remained in the cafeteria for a long moment after Harper joined her friends, long enough to see her take a bite of her sandwich without shaking, long enough to hear the tiny ripple of laughter float back toward him like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. That first laugh was a cathedral bell inside his chest, not loud, but pure, real. Then he left the lunchroom, with purpose. Word of the confrontation had already spread through the building like wind catching dry leaves. By the time he reached the main hallway, teachers watched from doorframes, students peered over lockers, whispers trailed behind him like shadows trying to keep pace. But not all eyes held gratitude. Two teachers, Mr. Hargrove and Mrs. Birch, stood near the office, faces tight, arms crossed with indignation rather than remorse. They exchanged a low conversation, one Grant was not meant to hear, but the building carried sound like guilt carries memory. He embarrassed staff in front of students, Birch muttered. "This will blow back on us all," Hargrove hissed. "We shouldn't let him dictate policy, money or not." Grant paused, listening without turning. Power didn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it required patience. Seeds of resistance were sprouting, and he needed to know exactly where they grew. Instead of responding, he entered the principal's office, invited by no one, stopped by no one. Whitford followed moments later, clearly shaken, closing the door behind them. She sat across from him. No desk separated them. No furniture served as armor. Just two adults and a responsibility neither could ignore now. "Mr. Ellison," she began softly, "I want to understand what I missed, what I allowed without realizing." He studied her face. Not defensive, not calculating, tired, honest. People often assumed power came from wealth, but sometimes it came simply from truth. "You hired teachers with impressive credentials," Grant said, "but you forgot to measure their character." Whitford nodded slowly, eyelids heavy like regret. "This school has been under pressure," she confessed. "Budget cuts, overcrowding, faculty frustration. Talbot was strict, but her students scored well. I thought results equaled success." Grant leaned forward. "Success," he said gently, "is measured in who children become, not how quietly they sit." Silence settled like snowfall, soft but irreversible. Whitford exhaled, hands folding on her lap. "I want your donation, but more than that, I want your guidance. You built an empire. You know how to lead culture, not just operations." Grant didn't smile, but something like approval warmed his features. "Then we build something new," he said. That afternoon became history, Grant stayed, touring classrooms, speaking with students, asking questions teachers never asked. He discovered patterns, little cruelties, overlooked embarrassment, outdated discipline disguised as tradition. A dozen Harpers sat in those halls, quiet from years of shrinking themselves thin to fit expectations. He took notes, he listened, he learned, and the next morning he returned, not alone. A board of child psychologists, educational reform experts, counselors trained in emotional intelligence, leaders who didn't wear power like a weapon, but like a responsibility. Together they walked the corridors, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp with purpose. Teachers stiffened, some defensive, some ashamed, some relieved that someone finally noticed. And then Mrs. Talbot returned. She marched into the school uninvited, demanding reinstatement, demanding apology, demanding the world bend back to the shape she once controlled. She forced her way into the cafeteria, the same place she once held dominance, and froze when she saw who now sat confidently among friends. Harper, not shrinking, not trembling, laughing, whole. Talbot's breath left her. Something inside her cracked, not anger this time, but awareness. She approached Harper's table with guilt blurring her hardened expression. "Harper," she whispered, voice weak. "May I speak with you?" The lunchroom tensed. Staff paused mid-step. Students leaned forward. Grant entered behind Talbot, silent, towering calm. Harper looked up, steady gaze meeting the woman who'd once broken her. Talbot swallowed. I was wrong." Harper blinked, quiet, listening. "I thought discipline was strength," Talbot continued, words shaking like they'd resisted escape for years. "But I hurt you and others. I'm sorry." Harper didn't know the weight of forgiveness, but she knew the weight of fear, and she no longer carried fear. She nodded, not erasing the past, but acknowledging the moment. Grant stepped beside her. "Humility begins here," he said softly. Talbot's eyes glistened, not with power, but release. She left the cafeteria differently than she once ruled it, not followed by fear, but followed by reflection. Principal Whitford addressed the entire student body later that week. Parents filled the auditorium, cameras streamed. Teachers sat in front rows, some nervous, some hopeful, some changed. Grant stood at center stage, not as a billionaire, not as a benefactor, but as a father holding his daughter's hand. Harper stood beside him, not hidden, not shrinking, voice clear, small but powerful. "My name is Harper Ellison," she said to a room built to listen. "And children should feel safe when they learn." The hall erupted in applause, not polite, not rehearsed, real. Grant lifted the microphone only after it quieted. "We will build a new culture here," he announced, "one where strength is measured by empathy, where teachers grow with students not above them, where no child eats alone, where curiosity is not punished, but nourished." He looked down at Harper. She smiled. "And what we do next," he continued, "will make the whole district tremble, not in fear, but in awakening." That promise became legacy. Under Grant's guidance, the school transformed. Training programs replaced outdated discipline. Student voice councils formed. Bullying policies rewrote themselves into zero-tolerance frameworks. Teachers learned names, not just grades. Children sat together, learned together, grew without shame. Harper thrived. Her laughter filled hallways like morning sun. Her voice joined student leadership. She raised her hand in class, unafraid to be wrong. She became the girl who once stood alone, but now stood unbreakable, and the staff trembled as promised, not under domination, but under accountability, under growth, under change. Grant watched the transformation quietly, always present but never domineering. His legacy wasn't the money, it wasn't the power, it was the light he returned to his daughter's eyes, and through her, every child whose voice once bent under authority. Billionaire father visited the school lunchroom and saw what the teacher did. He became outraged, and what he did next made the whole staff tremble. And in trembling, they woke.